Welcome to Justice at Work, Employee Rights and Protections in the Workplace.
Hello and welcome to Justice at Work, real talk from Filippatos, PLLC. My name is Kevin Rosenquist. I am your host and I am here with Erica Healey-Kagan. Each week, we're going to break down rights you didn't know you had, the systems that are stacked against you, and the legal paths that can set things right. Filippatos law fights for fairness in the workplace, and it's more than a profession to them. It is a mission. Erica, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Actually, I shouldn't say welcome back. This is your first episode, but our second one of this series that we're doing here. So thanks for being here. I talked to Jerry. He kind of gave me he gave us the intro to what you guys do, mainly with workplace discrimination. Today, we're going to talk about LGBTQIA plus rights and the legal progress in the workplace. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's rock and roll.
All right, cool. So let's start at the very beginning. What protections do LGBTQIA plus employees have at a state and the federal level today?
So it's a really good question because, as we know, the United States has a very complicated legal structure. We've got local laws, state laws, federal laws. Sometimes they're all the same. Sometimes they're very, very different, right? So in terms of the LGBT community, we have some good federal protections right now. We didn't always have that, but ever since the Bostock decision, which we'll talk about a little bit later, right now federally, LGBT workers should not be discriminated against, right, based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And if they are discriminated against or treated differently in any way, there are federal protections for them. And again, we'll talk about that case in a little bit, but there are absolutely federal protections which allow you to go to federal court if there's discrimination against you. And then on a state and local level, I would say in certain states, about 20 states or so, and many local municipalities. I'm sitting here right now in New York City where we have excellent local laws. So depending on where you live, again, both the state you live in and the specific locality you live in, you might have even better protections, is the way to think about it, right? We're pretty good right now on the federal level. There are protections, but one example in New York City of how the protections are even better is that New York City human rights law protects both against discrimination based on your actual sexual orientation, but also your perceived sexual orientation. So sometimes, right, if there's an argument of sexual orientation discrimination, the defendant might try to argue, your employer might try to say, I don't know your sexual orientation. I never knew it. So how could I discriminate against you for something that I don't know? And so when the law protects perceived sexual orientation, it doesn't matter whether they know the truth, whether it is true, whether it's not true. If the evidence shows that there's a bias there against gay people, for example, and that you're being treated differently because of that bias, full stop, that's illegal. Doesn't matter whether you're gay or not. It just matters what the employer thought, let's say, right? Which still can be a question of fact, but at least you're protected regardless of the actual facts in the case.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because, if somebody, doesn't talk about their sexual orientation, but an employer perceives them to be of a certain sexual orientation and discriminates against them, just claiming that you don't know for sure does not protect you, which is good.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay.
And oftentimes also, we know that perceptions are made about people sometimes just based on perhaps the way they dress.
Yep.
Or
mannerisms.
the way mannerisms, maybe the way they speak. And
Sure.
Sometimes that is, let's say, directly correlated to a person's identity, but sometimes it's not. And
Sure.
So the biases, unfortunately, are there regardless of, whether those correlations match up. And so certain laws, again, are better at protecting against any of that, unconscious bias than others. So again, depending on where you live, you may have better protections than other places, let's say.
So, okay, let's talk about landmark cases then. What landmark cases have helped move the needle forward?
Yeah, so in 2020, the Supreme Court, which we don't necessarily always expect in its current iteration to necessarily be advancing rights.
Very
Sometimes
true.
they're moving in another direction. But in 2020, the Bostock versus Clayton County case, it was actually a compilation of a few different cases, one involving an individual who was gay, one involving an individual who was transgender. The court did make a ruling that Title VII, which is the federal law that prohibits discrimination on a number of different protected categories, the Supreme Court ruled that that includes protections against discrimination on the basis of a person's sexual orientation as well as their gender identity. They didn't change the law. They didn't add the words sexual orientation or gender identity. What they did was they said the fact that sex is a protected characteristic is enough to protect someone for being treated differently based on their sexual orientation. And the general thought process there is if you're treating me, a woman, differently because I have a wife, that is treating a woman differently who has a wife than a man who has a wife, right?
Right.
So it really does, the Supreme Court said, boil down to your sex and being treated differently because of your sex. So that's interesting because, again, it brought us federal protections, which is great, but there's still more that can be done. And so what we can talk about a little bit more, some things that might happen in the future, but not having those words, sexual orientation and gender identity as protected characteristics are creating some difficulties in the courts for certain types of cases versus others. So again, that Bostock decision was amazing. It was incredible progress. And again, it brought us protections on the federal level for many circumstances that involve sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination. We're not necessarily all the way there, but it was excellent progress.
That's great. That's great. What kinds of discrimination have you seen LGBTQIA plus individuals commonly face on the job to this day?
Yeah. So as I said before, sometimes it's just perceptions about the way you dress or the way that your mannerisms or the way that you speak. Sometimes, unfortunately, again, it's unconscious bias. Once you do learn somebody's sexual orientation or their gender identity and just treating them differently, right? So sometimes it can be being harsher with discipline against a gay employee, for example, versus their straight counterparts. And it often can be quite subtle, unfortunately, and that's why it can be hard for an individual experiencing it to really know what's happening and to know that they should talk to an attorney about it. There can also be pay differences, being paid less than one of your colleagues for doing the same or very similar work. That's a pretty similar fact pattern sometimes. And then again, sometimes it's termination and, the person's performance did not have actual problems, but, problems were kind of being concocted and perhaps language was being used that was derogatory. And, if we have firsthand witness evidence of that, that is very helpful in a case. If certain comments have been made, again, using derogatory language about someone based on their sexual orientation, like slurs or anything like that, if that is something that happened leading up to a person's termination or leading up to a person's discipline, that kind of helps us to show that the employee didn't do anything wrong. It really was this bias that was leading their supervisor to treat them differently, basically.
Mm-hmm. I kind of talked to Jerry a little bit about this last episode, with a lot of these pullbacks from DEI initiatives and a seemingly, different perception now as far as equality in the workplace goes. Are you seeing any increases in discrimination since maybe January of this year?
It's a very good question. And I do think that a number of corporations are changing the ways that they perhaps do business or changing the types of employee resource groups that they have. And I would say that the biggest change right now, I think, is there's less support and promotion of DEI. It's not necessarily that we're seeing more discriminatory treatment, but we are seeing a lot less support.
Yeah.
A lot of our cases also, issues can begin to crop up sometimes many years ago or many months ago. And so, it's not always as quick as, since January, X, Y, and Z has happened. But again, I think that a lot of the protections are kind of crumbling for minority communities. And with that, I think will potentially come more employers or supervisors acting again on perhaps some unconscious biases that they have, because there's less of that impulse to respect respect diversity and promote diversity. So it's a little bit of an interesting situation we're in now, where lots of things are changing very quickly.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. For any employers that want to make their workplaces more inclusive, what are some practical steps that they can take?
Yeah, I think that employers should be really clear in their employee handbooks and their policies. And we always recommend we don't work specifically with employers, but if an employer or someone who's high up in a company were to ask me, I would say work with an employment attorney who specifically represents employers, right? Lawyers are kind of weird in this sense, and we tend to take sides, and we don't really, cross the V, let's say, right? So we represent plaintiffs usually in our firm, but there's tons of great firms where they only represent employers, right? And the good employer attorneys are there to help you avoid problems before they even happen, right? And so there's lots of, again, great employer attorneys who can help you to make sure you have really clear policies and employee handbooks about what isn't going to be tolerated in your workplace, and what types of repercussions there could be if there are issues with mistreatment of employees, and also having a very clear complaint structure, right? So sometimes we hear from potential clients that they feel that something was wrong, but their company doesn't have a human resources department and they don't really know who to talk to, right? So if your supervisor is the person who's mistreating you, who do you go to? You go to somebody else's supervisor? A lot of times people don't know. So, very clear policies about what won't be tolerated, but also clear policies about what to do if you, one of their employees, feels that you're being mistreated on any basis. Who do you talk to? Especially, who do you talk to if you can't talk to your own supervisor or don't feel comfortable talking to your supervisor? What's the chain of command, basically, and what are all of your options for who to speak to? Luckily, the law does protect that fact that employees don't always know who to speak to. So we can make arguments in cases as long as you spoke to somebody, right? As long as you did your best to make a complaint about what's happening, you still are protected for doing that, even if you quote unquote didn't make a perfect complaint. But it causes a lot of stress if you don't know who to speak to, and it can cause a lot of anxiety for your employees. So having that clear reporting structure is very important, and also having trainings where you're kind of assuming the best, right? You're assuming that nobody's going to do these types of improper things, but let's just talk about how to handle difficult situations so that we don't, allow ourselves to get into a situation where biases creep up or any sort of mistreatment happens. So those types of trainings are very helpful. And then I would just say lead by example, right? Be someone who is open to working with lots of different people, bringing people on board of various backgrounds and various races and sexual orientations and genders, and just really try to lead by example as an officer or director of a corporation.
I always feel like it makes for a more interesting work environment too when you have people of different backgrounds. If we're all the same, it's pretty boring.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to work with me.
I know, right? I don't want to work with me either. I'm tired of myself.
Exactly.
Obviously, it's important to advocate for LGBTQIA plus rights throughout the year, but do you feel it's really important to spotlight these rights during Pride Month?
Absolutely. And I think that, especially, every month we, tend to highlight either a specific cause or a specific group. And so I think especially in the workplace where we all spend a lot of our time.
Sure.
Whether we in just our conversations highlight Pride Month or whether corporations highlight Pride Month, it's really helpful to make LGBT employees feel welcome and, accepted, and like they can bring their whole selves to work. I think that also, again, highlighting Pride Month, just in our communities and, out in the world is important because, unfortunately, right now, we're also in a world where we've made some strides in favor of our community, but then we also have folks who are trying to change the legal landscape, let's say, right? So one example of that is after the Bostock decision that we talked about briefly earlier, the Biden administration actually put out an executive order that provided even further protections for federal workers, basically saying, as we said, Bostock provides some protections, but we're going to specifically protect federal workers from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. We're not going to leave it up to an interpretation of the word sex. We're going to delineate that federal workers are protected. On the first day of the Trump administration, he actually rescinded that executive order and also said that there are only two sexes and your sex is determined based on the sex assigned to you at birth, no exceptions, basically. So, right, we've seen, kind of two steps forward, one or two or more steps back over time. So it's a good time, I think, for folks who are supportive of the LGBT community to show that support, because, right, in a time where some people are looking to kind of bring us back, those of us who are looking forward can find each other and, feel supported by one another. So it's a great month to do it, but let's also do it all year round.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely groups that are pushing harder to take away rights too, that are I don't know, getting more in the news, getting more publicity, and doing some unfortunate things to try to move us back. So you're right. Yeah, it's important to advocate all year long and support. Do you see any future changes in employment law that could impact the community?
So I would love to say that, we're going to keep moving the ball forward and that I'm confident that, we will have excellent laws that protect us. But the reality probably is that we'll have, again, two steps forward, one or two or more steps back for the foreseeable future. So again, the Trump administration has taken some steps back in the ways in which it can do so unilaterally through executive orders. But there's also proposed legislation in Congress to, again, move the ball towards inclusivity. There's an act that's called the Equality Act that has been introduced a number of times. I believe it has passed the House a number of times, probably not in the current House, but in the prior Democratic-led houses. Representative Sharice Davids and other LGBT members of the House of Representatives have, reproposed it every year. And that bill, among other things, again, would very clearly add to the federal protections that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity are illegal. Again, not basing it on the interpretation of the word sex, but, clearly saying that, for just in no uncertain terms, let's say, right? Saying that in no uncertain terms. And so again, the House has passed it a few times, the Senate has not. So at some point, my hope is that that bill passes. So it's very clear that we are federally protected regardless of where we live. But I will also say there are some advancements locally as well. The New York City Council just passed a set of bills recently that do a better job of protecting transgender individuals from discrimination, mistreatment, various problems in the healthcare field, just a number of different protections. So again, that's New York City being fairly wonderful, but the hope, right, is that we continue to move the ball forward for everyone in the community federally, but also on a state and local basis when that federal protection isn't possible.
Amazing that it's 2025 and we're still talking about equality. Well,
That is
here
true.
we are. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was really fascinating to chat with you. And thank you for listening to Justice at Work, powered by Filippatos PLLC. If you're dealing with workplace discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, or you just want to know about your rights, visit filippatos.law.com to schedule a consultation. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We got lots more stuff coming your way. Erica, so great having you here. I look forward to chatting with you again. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.